This is such an honor to be introducing Dr. Vesta Sarkhosh Curtis. She is the Emeritus Curator of Middle Eastern coins at the British Museum, with responsibility of ancient Iranian coins and coins of the Islamic world. She retired in December 23 and continues at the British Museum as an honorary research fellow. Born in Tehran, she obtained an MA in Near Eastern Archaeology and Ancient Iranian Languages in Germany and a PhD from the University College of London on Parthian art. She is particularly interested in the royal and religious iconography of the pre-Islamic period of Iran and Mesopotamia from the 6th century BCE to the 7th century CE. She has published extensively on ancient Persian coins, art, culture, and mythology. She was joint editor of the journal Iran from 1983 to 2003, secretary of the British Institute of Persian Studies from 1998 to 2003, president of the British Institute of Persian Studies from 2006 to 2011, and secretary of the Royal Numismatic Society from 2005 to 2010. She is a senior advisor of the SOAS Shapurji Palonji Institute of Zoroastrian Studies at the University of London and honorary director and vice president of the British Institute of Persian Studies. She has contributed to a series of major exhibitions on Iran, the Forgotten Empire in 2005-06 at the British Museum, and the Cyrus Cylinder and Ancient Persia exhibition that toured Tehran and then the US, before coming here to our very own museum in Mumbai in 2013-14. Dr. Vesta Sarkhosh Curtis has been a dear friend of the CSMVS over the years, guiding several of our international projects, and it is a great honor to have her here in Mumbai to deliver the 39th Coomaraswamy Memorial Lecture. She will be speaking about Persia and Rome, interactions and trade connections, and this lecture is part of a larger series of academic programs that have been planned as a part of the CSMVS Ancient World Project. For some of our newer audiences, the Ancient World Project has been initiated at the CSMVS through the support of the J. Paul Getty Trust. It is an educational initiative that aims to amplify the learning of history and art in Indian schools and universities by providing experiences with original works of art as evidence of a shared history. Many of you would have seen the first phase of this project, the Ancient Sculptures exhibition that concluded earlier this year. And I'm happy to share that the second phase opens in late 2025 and will see the creation of a new state-of-the-art gallery which will have over 300 works of art on display on loan from major international lenders, including the British Museum, the State Museums of Berlin, the Museum Rietberg, and so on. Several Indian museums will also be lending to this prestigious project. And in a new model of world interaction and global co-curation, the project itself is being curated by the CSMVS curators, along with their counterparts from these lending museums. Thank you so much, Dr. Curtis, for choosing this subject. I think it is so relevant to our project and for all of us curators who will be listening to you today. And with that, may I invite you to give your lecture.
Thank you very much, Vaidehi. Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee, Chair of Trustees and all trustees of the CSMVS Museum. Thank you to all ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces from Iran, from London, everywhere. And it is true that I really do love India, and particularly Mumbai and the CSMVS. It's like a second home to me. And thank you, Maruk, and Firuza Godrej, and Firuza Mystery. So everybody, it's lovely, lovely to see you all. I've talked in many venues, but I've never been in paradise. This is like paradise. This is a beautiful setting. It's the Persian paradise, the Paradaiti. So thank you for choosing this particular place for me to talk. And it is a great honor to have been selected for the 39th Coomaraswamy Memorial Lecture. I'm really honored and I'm very humbled to do that. I will take you through almost 500 years of history and interactions between Persia or Iran and the West. And because I start from around the 2nd century before the Christian era, when Rome was gradually coming up as a major power, I will focus on the eastern side, on the Parthian and Sasanian dynasties. Unfortunately, when it comes to contact between Persia and Rome, historians are reliant on the accounts made by authors of the classical world, whose descriptions and retellings of events are often biased in nature. So we will go through many accounts of conflict, but at the same time we should always bear in mind that there were also interactions, and there was communication, and particularly trade connections. In the Roman period, Roman art has the tendency to portray the Parthian, the Eastern Iranian opponents as the, quote, proud, quarrelsome, faithless, and insolent people they believe them to be, quote, always restless and ready for any commotion at home and abroad. These are sort of descriptions that unfortunately we find in Roman accounts. Complementing the accounts of their wars in the East, Roman coinage also celebrated the victories proudly. And on the other hand, the Parthians, for example, who were in contact continuously with the Romans, don't talk about the Romans at all, and in their art also never portray the Romans. I think the main message that we get here, that these wars politically were important for the Parthians and the Sasanians, but they were not the main sort of ideological concept or what they wanted to achieve. For the Parthians and the Sasanians, it was always much more important to persuade the aristocracy and the peoples around them that they were the legitimate rulers of ancient Iran. So we'll now go through a number of instances. This is a wonderful cameo in the Bibliothèque Nationale of Paris, showing the two opponents, Shapur the first on the right, dating probably to around 260 of the Christian era, and Valerian the emperor, who was defeated by Shapur, the emperor of Rome, on the left. And also in the Sasanian period, around the 3rd century of the Christian era, there are a couple of rock reliefs celebrating the triumph over the Romans. We come to talk about it as we go along historically, but the Romans start much earlier, particularly around 20 to 17 before the Christian era, as you see on the left on the statue of Augustus from Primopota. And again, I will go into detail and describe what exactly is portrayed and what the message was. The first official encounter between Parthia and Rome occurred in around 96 before the Christian era, during the reign of the important Parthian king of kings, Mithridates or Mehrdad II. The Roman proconsul, Sulla, you see his coin on the far left, top left, and the Parthian envoy, Orobatsus, met on the river Euphrates between the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire, now in modern-day Iraq, somewhere between the kingdoms of Armenia and Cappadocia. The issue addressed at the meeting concerned the growing ambitions of two smaller kingdoms, Mithridates VI of Pontus, Tigranes II of Armenia, that you see on the right. By this time, Parthia had established itself as the major power east of the river Euphrates and sought alliance and friendship. This is mentioned actually in the historical sources of Rome, of the Romans. But Rome feared the alliance between Armenia and Parthia, and also Armenia and Cappadocia. While we do not know precisely the terms that came out of the discussions, the event seems to have established the river Euphrates, now in modern Iraq, as the western frontier of the Parthian Empire. The Romans continued to resist the growing power of Mithridates of Pontus, and they engaged in a series of wars. The next major conflict between Parthia and Rome turned out to be devastating for Rome. Crassus, a member of the first triumvirate and said to have been the wealthiest man in Rome at the time, was serving as governor of Syria in 55 BCE. Driven by personal ambitions for military and political glory, Crassus set his sights on a conquest in the east. And here he was encouraged by the king of Armenia. Armenia always played a very important role, sometimes siding with Rome, sometimes siding with Parthia, but very much under the control of the Parthian king of kings. When the king of Parthia, Orodes II, heard about Crassus's campaign, he sent a message actually to Crassus, and we hear about this again from the historian Plutarch. He writes, I quote, "No sooner had he, Crassus, begun to assemble his forces from their winter quarters that envoys came to him from Orodes II with a wonderfully brief message. They said that if the army had been sent out by the Roman people, it meant war without truce and without treaty. But if it was for his own private gain that Crassus had come up in arms against the Parthians and occupied their territories, then Orodes would act with moderation, would take pity on the old age of Crassus." To this, Crassus boastfully replied that he would give his answer in Seleucia. And I show you just briefly where Seleucia is. It was one of the capitals of the Parthian Empire. Where at this point, the eldest of the envoys burst out laughing and said, pointing to the palm of his upturned hand, I quote, "O Crassus, hair will grow there before thou shalt see Seleucia." I mean, we know that he never got to Seleucia. So Crassus crossed the Euphrates and his army met the Parthian forces of Surena. And although we don't know how Surena looked like, we imagine him to be like this wonderful and beautiful bronze statue in the National Museum of Iran, the bronze statue of Shami. I think he must have looked something like that. Here the Romans experienced for the first time the exemplary skills of their opponents in archery and horsemanship. Just showing you some terracotta figurines. And the Parthians were famous for their Parthian shot. They were galloping and then turning away and shooting from the back. And Plutarch writes, "For the Parthians shot as they fled, and next to the Scythians, they do this most effectively." Crassus's army was overwhelmed and he was forced to defeat. He was killed, and the Romans suffered a huge humiliation and lost their standards, which was a very important thing to the Romans. Then after this humiliating defeat, Caesar tried to make peace with the Parthians, and he sent also an envoy to the Parthian court seeking support. But this was at the time of Prince Pakoros, a son of Orodes II. I'm showing you all these coins. They are really magnificent, but usually when they're blown up and shown in big size. Usually when you look at the coins, they're very small, and you don't notice how beautiful and how detailed they are. In the spring of 36 BC, Mark Antony set off with a substantial army towards Parthia and used Armenia, which once again had switched sides to the Romans, as his base. He reached Praspa, the capital of Media Atropatene in western Iran, a local kingdom, and Dio Cassius, the historian, Roman historian, reports on the exchanges that took place between the Roman commander and the Parthian king. Cassius Dio writes, Phraates IV, this is at the bottom, Mark Antony, and at the top, Labienus, and here are on the right, coin of Phraates IV, and Cassius Dio explains and writes that at this meeting between Phraates and Mark Antony, the king was seated upon a golden chair, twanging his bowstring, exactly as you see the Parthian archer. Yeah, that's it. You can see him at the bottom right-hand side, sitting on his throne and holding a bow. Despite these setbacks, Rome continued in its attempt to engage with Parthia, and they often tried to influence the kings of Armenia, who were related usually to the kings of Parthia. In 20 BC, Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, visited Syria, and with his stepson Tiberius, he started a diplomatic campaign. Augustus began to negotiate the return of the lost standards, and they were successful. And they also handed these standards, the Parthians handed the standards back to Parthia. In the Roman sphere, this diplomatic success, and it's very important because it was a diplomatic success, they negotiated and the Romans decided to talk to the Parthians, and the Parthians, in a friendly, peaceful manner, returned these lost standards. But in the Roman sphere, this diplomatic success was given a political spin, and the return of the standards were widely celebrated in Augustus's bilingual funerary inscription known as the Res Gestae. And here he writes, I forced the Parthians to restore the spoils and standards of 3 Roman armies and to ask them as suppliants for the friendship of the Roman people. These standards I deposited in the inner shrine, which is the temple of Mars Ultor. And you can see on the breastplate of the Augustus statue of Prima Porta, you can see the Parthian is returning the standard to a representative of Rome, perhaps even a sort of image of the god Mars. And coins of Augustus show a bearded Parthian here, dressed in tunic and trousers, kneeling on the ground as a supplicant and offering a Roman standard. A similar scene you will find again and again, actually, on later Parthian coins, Roman coins. As part of the terms of the peace treaty, Augustus sent a Roman slave called Musa. You see her here on the back of a coin of Phraates or Phraates V. And she was elevated to the rank of queen when she married Phraates IV. Now, Musa unfortunately persuaded her son to kill his father, so that he would come to the throne, and together with his son, her son, they ruled for 4 or 5 years over the Parthian Empire. Despite the thawing in relations under Augustus, both Parthia and Rome continued their efforts to expand their sphere of influence in the 1st century AD. And this is very important because by expanding their sphere of influence, they also controlled, each side tried to control the very active trade that was going from east to west. Mr. Mukherjee, you mentioned the trade that went along the Persian Gulf. Also in Iran itself, in the highlands, there were a number of trade routes, nowadays often described as the so-called silk routes. And here, merchants from the east, from China and from India, traded goods through Parthia with Rome. And it's very interesting that we have, for example, Chinese sources of about 80 before the Christian era, referring to this overland trade. This is one of the earliest Chinese sources. And they say that they very much would have liked to trade with Rome directly, but the Parthians wouldn't allow that. The Parthians wanted the Chinese to use them as middlemen to send their merchandises to Rome. Now, despite the thawing relations, they were still quarreling, in particular over Armenia. And there's a very interesting letter that we are told of by, again, Cassius Dio, that talks about a conversation between the King of Kings, Artabanus II, who ruled from about 10 to 38 before of the Christian era, and the Emperor Tiberius of Rome. Artabanus, as you see him looking frontally on the front of the coin and on the back riding a horse, he wrote to, it's actually reported by Tacitus, not by Dio Cassius. He wrote to Tiberius and said, he insisted, this is very interesting, on the ancient boundaries of Persia and Macedonia. And he meant that he was to seize the countries that were possessed previously by Cyrus and afterwards Alexander, which means that these ancient peoples, they had a very clear understanding of the history of previous dynasties. These were recorded in letters, in documents, and they knew exactly what the remits of their country and other countries were. Some decades later, an attempt by Vologases I in the second half of the first Christian century to put his brother Tiridates on the Armenian throne once again created conflict with Rome. When the Rome-backed king of Armenia had been murdered by a relative, this paved the way for the Parthians to march into Armenia and appoint Tiridates as ruler in 53 of the Christian era. However, the Roman emperor was not to give up on Armenia. In 58 of the Christian era, the Roman general Corbulo marched into Armenia with his army and captured the capital Artaxata. A year later, he seized another center, Tigranocerta, and Tigranes V was put on the Armenian throne. Why I'm saying all this is because Armenia played a very important role in relations between Parthia and the Roman Empire, and later on also under the Sasanians, the Sasanian crown prince was often king of Armenia. Now we come to a very interesting story that I think is fascinating. In the year 66 of the Christian era, Vologases the brother of Tiridates, king of Armenia, made a long journey to Rome, where he was crowned by Nero as king of Armenia. Now you have to remember, this king of Armenia was a Parthian, right? He was the brother of the king of Parthia. This event was described by Cassius Dio as follows. When Tiridates comes to Rome, I quote, "Master, I am the descendant of Arsaces, brother of the king of kings Vologases and Pacorus. And I have come to thee, my God, to wish thee as I do Mithras." Nero replied to him as follows, "Well hast thou done to come hither in person, that meeting me face to face thou mightest enjoy my grace." Now this story is important because Tiridates came to Rome with hundreds of white horses, and also a large number of priests, all Zoroastrian priests, all dressed in white and bringing presents to Nero. It is said that this is probably or possibly the story behind the whole idea of the three kings coming to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And that this was the inspiration, because we hear about the three kings in the book of Matthew, which is quite late, but this story may have had its inspiration from the story of Tiridates' visit to Rome. And of course we know that one of the three kings, and I will show you later on, was Caspar, a beautiful ancient Iranian name, probably Gondophares, a Parthian king from the east. So the whole story makes sense that there was a lot of interaction, even at time of war. There was a lot of interaction and there was a lot of cultural contact between Rome and Parthia, and later on between Rome and the Sasanian Empire. But the most outstanding Parthian-Roman encounter occurred during the reigns of Osroes I and Trajan. Supremacy over Armenia was once again the main catalyst for the conflict. Trajan left Rome in 130 of the Christian era, and the main reason for his campaigns may have been to gain control over the trade routes. You see, it makes sense. It's actually quite topical, one can say. And Trajan arrived in Antiochia on the Orontes in Syria, and in the following spring he he started an invasion of Armenia, and you will see that he minted a series of coins where he celebrated the submission of Parthia and also Armenia. Here you see a Parthian king kneeling in front of the enthroned Trajan, and he also introduced legends like Armenia and Mesopotamia placed under the control of the Roman people. And also the other very popular legend that the Roman kings used was Parthia captured. So this sort of encounter between the two empires continued, and the Romans were very quick to use this military conquest and celebrate, as you see here at the bottom of this gold coin of Trajan, Parthia captor. You know, Parthia captured is a legend that celebrates the victory of Trajan. But this was not the end of Parthian rule in Mesopotamia. Various revolts sprang up against Roman control, and the Roman army clamped down on revolts, sacked and burned cities, including Seleucia on the Tigris, and a siege of the caravan city of Hatra in northern Mesopotamia happened in 117 of the Christian era. But relations between the two superpowers improved again under Trajan's successor Hadrian. And I have to say that Trajan actually traveled to the Persian Gulf. He went to the shores of the Persian Gulf, stood there, and he remembered Alexander's journey to India. And he said, if I were young, I would have followed Alexander. But he then retreated. Then under Trajan's successor Hadrian, relations improved, and once again the river Euphrates was recognized as the official frontier. And this went on under various other Roman emperors, and one of the sites that both Parthians and the Romans tried to take control of was Hatra. Hatra is a city, it's a caravan city. It's a city where trade went through in northern Mesopotamia, northern Iraq, near Mosul. And do enjoy these photographs, because most of these statues actually were destroyed a few years ago and they don't exist. And there was this wonderful series of temples dedicated to Shamash, the sun god, and the Parthians had, for most of the time, control over Hatra, and the trade from Iran went through Hatra into Mesopotamia, into Syria. Then Vologases IV came to the Parthian throne in 147, and he reconquered most of the territories lost to Rome. And the sort of conflict continued actually under the next Roman emperors, Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius. By the way, this is the time where the film Gladiator takes place. You know, when Marcus Aurelius dies and he appoints his son Commodus. This is exactly this period where conflict with Parthia was at its height. Then we come to another Parthian, a Roman emperor, Septimius Severus, who also fought against the Parthians, and he built a monument, an arch. He built a series of monuments, but his arch in the Forum at Rome celebrates the victory over the Parthians. Here you can see them. You can always recognize the Parthians on Roman monuments through their trousers. There are two nations that wear trousers, the Dacians and the Parthians. And this is most probably a Parthian taken captive by the Romans. And here another view, and on this side of the arch of Septimius Severus, it's a bit hazy, the photograph. We can see actually the sacking of Seleucia, the Parthian capital. When Vologases V died, when Vologases V died, around 208, Parthia and Rome reached a detente until the death of Septimius Severus. Now, during this time, the new Parthian king, the Parthian king Vologases VI, was being challenged by his brother Artabanus IV. And Artabanus IV was minting coins in Iran, in the highlands, and Vologases VI was minting coins in Mesopotamia. But soon Artabanus IV was facing actually another threat, and this time it came from a local king from Persis. Let's go there and I'll come back afterwards. From a local king in southern Iran, the province of Persis, and this was Ardashir, the king of local king of Persis, who challenged Artabanos at the Battle of Hormozgan in 223-4. And the Parthian Empire collapsed, and the new dynasty came to power under Ardashir I. Here you see this rock relief at Firuzabad, where Ardashir is throwing Artabanos off his horse, and this is sort of regarded as one of the important reliefs celebrating the advent of the new dynasty. Ardashir celebrated his ascension to the throne also on another relief here at Naqsh Rostam, where he receives his investiture from Ahura Mazda. But it was really under his son Shapur I where Rome and Sasanian Persia started their interactions again. And Shapur was engaged in a series of wars, first against the Roman Emperor Gordian III, and then against Philippus, known as Philippus Arab, and then finally against Valerian. And in his inscription at Naqsh Rostam, Shapur describes that Emperor Philippus came to us and gave us 500,000 denarii, gold coins of blood money. And here you see Shapur celebrating his Roman victories at Bishapur and at Naqsh Rostam. At Bishapur, Gordianus, the dead Roman emperor, is lying under the horse's legs, and here at Naqsh Rostam, he is facing Philip the Arab and Valerian. In AD, in 252 of the Christian era, and I just want to show you, of the Christian era, let's go back. I have to go back. Sorry, yes. And this is a coin, please note, this is a coin that was discovered about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, where it is, the legend mentions Philippus, the Roman emperor, facing Shapur. In 252, Armenia was conquered by Shapur, and his son Hormuz was appointed king of Armenia. And a few years later, Dura Europus was besieged and destroyed by Shapur. The siege has been dated to 256 of the Christian era. The next Sasanian encounter with Rome took place shortly after 260 of the Christian era, when he and his army occupied Carrhae and Edessa along the river Tigris. The Roman prisoners taken at this battle, they were moved to Iran, in southern Iran, southwestern Iran, and settled in Fars. And we know that from the inscriptions of Shapur, from Kabe Zardosht, that he actually did resettle Romans in southwestern Iran. The successors of Shapur Bahram or Varahram II and his father Vahram I had little sort of encounter with Rome, but they were actually not very successful, but it is interesting that Bahram II minted coins with his family shown on these coins, as you see here on the front of his coins, where he seems to have, I don't know whether you can see it in the corner, sitting there, this gold coin of Septimus Severus, which is earlier than the coin of Bahram, shows Septimus Severus with his family and his two sons. So again, this is proof that in both courts and administrations, they were aware of what the other one was doing, what sort of coins they were minting, what sort of iconography they were using in their art and in their coinage, because it looks as if Bahram has imitated the sort of iconography of the coinage of Septimus Severus, who was earlier than him. Then Rome's influence over Armenia was re-established in the Third Christian era, and the Romans appointed actually an Arsacid, a Parthian, called Tiridates on the Roman throne. When the Sasanian king, Narses, succeeded to the throne, you see him on the left at the rock relief at Nakhshe-Rostam, he declared war on the Romans and chased Tiridates out of Armenia. But later, in 297 of the Christian era, Narses, who was a son of Shapur I, and in his, during his time as crown prince, he was the king of Armenia, he first was victorious against Galerius, the Roman emperor, or deputy emperor, but a year later, the Sasanian army was defeated in Armenia. And Narses' family were taken captive, and he was forced to concede a harsh peace term imposed on him by the Roman Emperor Diocletian. The Romans acquired new territories in some Armenian provinces in northern Mesopotamia, and now Roman control went as far as the Syrian border and southern Turkey. What was also very interesting is that during this time of conquest and defeat, the trade centers moved. So that one region that was actually favored by the Sasanians to use as trading post in the north for merchandisers coming along the northern Silk routes into the Eastern Roman Empire was Armenia, Lesser Armenia, the Armenia that was actually nearer the Sasanian Empire. And they tried to keep that area, even during times of conflict, as neutral as possible so that they could move merchants backwards and forwards. Then Sasanian supremacy was reinstated by Shapur II, who ruled from 309 to 379, as you see on this rock relief from Tarabostan. He is shown, and behind him, most probably the god Mithra standing on lotus leaves. And under the feet, you can see a dead Roman Emperor Julian, known also as Julian the Apostate. But conflict between Rome, and by now in the 5th century it was more Eastern Rome or Byzantium, continued through the later centuries of Sasanian rule. And Rome encountered Byzantium in a series of wars in the beginning of the 6th century of the Christian era, and actually the Sasanians were successful. The Romans had to pay 11,000 pounds of gold, and another 2,000 pounds in weight of gold came a few years later. The peace treaty came to an end when Turkic tribes began to negotiate with Byzantium in 568 of the Christian era, and they proposed to Justin II to take joint control of the Silk routes to the exclusion of the Sasanians. But an offensive by Justin against the Sasanians in 572 of the Christian era failed due to lack of support from the Turks. This encounter with Byzantium continues, and relations with Byzantium deteriorated when Maurice, the Byzantine emperor, was deposed and replaced by Phocas. And once again, Sasanian, Persia, and Byzantium were fighting over supremacy in the region. In 615 of the Christian era, the Sasanian army had reached Jerusalem, and the city was seized and the Holy Cross taken as booty to Ctesiphon, the Sasanian capital. But when the tide changed again, and in 622, Emperor Heraclius began a huge offensive with the Khazars of the Caspian region against the Sasanian king of kings. The result was devastating for the Sasanian army, and Khosrow's successors, including Khosrow II's successors, including his two daughters, and here you have on the right Queen Buran, and also the last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, were now much more focused on revolts by Turkic tribes in the east, and also the advance of Arab tribes in the west. So, as I mentioned, these encounters went on both at times of war, but throughout this time, trade was very important for both the Romans and also for the Persians through the highlands of Iran, and also through the Persian Gulf into to the Indian Ocean and to India and Sri Lanka. Silk was a very popular commodity and sought after by the Romans, and according to Roman sources, Persian merchants were buying whole cargoes from Indian ships. And we know, for example, that Indian merchants, of course, were very active in the trade along the Persian Gulf, and there is this find of Indian timber at Berenike, a port in Egypt, that has shown how actually merchant colonies lived on these sites, on these foreign sites, and also encouraged the sort of progress of trade. The same thing can be said, of course, with the sites of Hatra, Palmyra, and Dura Europus, where we have inscriptions that report about merchants frequently traveling from Syria into the Parthian Empire, up the river Euphrates to the Parthian capitals, and that they may have been even colonies for these foreign merchants within Parthia, and certainly Spasinu-Charax near the Persian Gulf was a very important trade center. But in addition to trade, I think there was another very important factor, not just wars, not just trade, but there was also cultural exchange. And I think this is something that we usually forget and we neglect. We have all these sources unfortunately only from the Roman side. The Parthians did not record much, who go on and on about victories of the Romans. We know from excavations and from inscriptions that trade was going on. But there was also a very active cultural exchange. We know that, for example, at the beginning of the 3rd century of the Christian era, there were Zoroastrians and Christians and Jews exchanging ideas. There were even conversions at that time. So we keep forgetting about this. We know that, for example, Shapur I was very captivated, very interested in other religions, hence the influence of Manichaeism at his court. But we always think of them in monolithic sections, and the Sasanians for themselves, the Romans for themselves. Unfortunately, this view of cultural exchange was neglected for a long, long time, mainly for historians, by European historians who focused really on the grandeur and the importance of ancient Rome, just as they did with ancient Greece. And the Parthians and the Sasanians were often neglected. But we mustn't really forget that. I mean, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, one aspect that I find very interesting is the importance of the whole story of the Magi entering the Christian ideology. I mean, we are near Christmas and we'll be thinking of the 3 kings, but it's always good to remember that one of the kings was definitely Caspar, as you see the stala from a colonne in the British Museum, and he's named on it, and he is a Parthian king. Then what I pointed out, the whole story of the adoration of the Magi. Where does the whole term Magi come from? It's mentioned for the first time in an inscription of Darius the Great, dating to 520 before the Christian era at Bisutun, where he talks about the revolt of the Magi, Magush, the wise man. So I think we should bear that in mind and not forget the sort of impact that ancient Iran or ancient Persia had in a cultural sphere, both on Greece and then later also on Rome. And there were also religious exchanges and interactions. So one should bear that in mind at the same time as one reads into all the battles and all the encounters between Rome and Persia, but there was more than that, and there was always a very active exchange going on. Thank you very much. This comes to the end of my talk. Thank you.